Some big pennies dropping this week. The biggest probably the fact of US disengagement from Ukraine. It's not just them that are being given the heave-ho, it's Europe. When will we awaken to that and realise it has to be one united Europe with really vigorous policies and not trying to sook up to Trump because they're not interested? We discuss. We look also at the big statement about energy for an independent Scotland and the promise of a third off bills. Is that realistic? Of course it actually is, but quite how would you get there? And does John Swinney have to spell it out? The nuclear consensus amongst Labour, Tory and the Westminster parties continues. Why on earth are they so keen to have new nuclear plants in Scotland? We talk about Malcolm Offord. Well, he would wish to be Malcolm because he's so sorry that he is a baron. He has to renounce that title, or at least he can't unbecome a baron. But if he wants to stand for the Scottish Parliament, he just has to not be a member of the House of Lords. What a shame. And we look at the Sandy Peggy verdict. Does anybody kind of really see clearly what it means? Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Leslie Riddoch podcast. Is that Will-o'-the-Wisp or it's not really the old man of the forest? You were looking very cool in your
my hat.
Buried kipper, I have to say. It looked quite something. It reminded me of, what do you call it? The Christmas is Yet to Come, or whatever it was, the jolly one out of Scrooge.
Oh, right. Okay, that's nice, yeah.
No, but the nice, happy, jolly Christmas spirit. I can't remember. Is he the Christmas past? Can't remember which one is which, but I'm sure I will be getting that pumped into me over the next couple of weeks.
Well, for the uninformed, which is everybody now except you and me, this was a berry crown that you're talking about. We'll stick the picture somewhere, but it was basically it was a project that started in 2000 by the community in Borgie, North Sutherland, who are actually nearly all the descendants of people cleared by the Duke of Sutherland's factor, Patrick Seller, who had Sire Estate, which is up Strathnaver, now almost completely empty, cleared 236 families, burnt their houses, actually killed somebody, was had up in court in 1816, but a jury of the great and the good found him not guilty, so on he went. The glen was cleared, and people... That's why, it's empty now. It was a fairly fertile strath. So anyway, there's everybody kind of, just sitting on the edges now. Beautiful, beautiful edges around from Tongue, Betty Hill, all those sorts of communities. And also then trees. This is near part of the flow country, and it has been a kind of site for the Terry Wogan type, God rest his soul, exploitation of kind of grants and such like, putting massive swathes of Sitka spruce on areas that were probably capturing more carbon without trees at all, it would have to be said, but also, usually wrong trees, wrong place. So that's been kind of the norm. And so these guys in 2000, the community decided, well, we're going to actually plant a little spiral which will consist of the 18 species of native trees, which actually populate the Gaelic alphabet. It's called the Ogham alphabet. It started in Ireland, came across to Scotland in the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. And it looks runic, but don't say that to any of the Ogham experts because it just ain't. But it's a lot of kind of sort of stick-looking signs, which, when you've got 1, 2, or 3, indicate which tree you're talking about. A1, for example, is A for A, and that is in Gaelic is elm, which is the elm in English. And so it goes on. So it's kind of a pretty cool thing, actually. And it's quite possible then they planted a spiral with all the 18. 200 kids from the local schools came to plant it. So it's probably the only Ogham forest in the world. So they decided to have a 25th kind of anniversary bash of this. It's priceless stuff, actually. What was it, 3rd or 5th of December or something, deepest winter. It kind of in a log cabin as a base, which actually works really well. It just reminds me of all the Nordic stuff when you get some decent building going on. It was really toasty. All the kids back out again, the local fesh there, having them all singing and playing Gaelic music. reopening, and hence the Berry Crown, because I was, the guest of honour to reopen the whole thing and plant another tree. And I kind of thought, when I was doing it, I thought this is actually very moving, and it's a significant thing. It's a tiny little community, but it's kind of a really bold thing that they tried to do, to integrate their language, their culture, the trees that would be native, and their ownership as a community in the face of, overwhelming odds. Without getting into all of it, the massive estates owned by Anders Poulsen are just to the west of them. So this is just a little something. And this is just to say, I filmed it. God almighty, I'm no filmmaker, but there was nobody else around. And I thought, well, I managed to do this on Iceland. So I kind of ran around creating a bit of film, aided by a guy called John from Dornoch, who came and did lots of stills and other film photography. So anyway, we hopefully are going to get it edited. And if anybody from Sutherland is listening who's got 50 quid, we all did it for free, but it's not fair to ask, as you know, Fraser, editing is forever. Yeah. So it's not fair to ask an editor to do this for free. So I'm looking to now have to put together some money to pay the editor. So I'll maybe get to a crowdfunder, but it would be quite nice if we could just get wildlife type people. There isn't any clearance type cultural people. It all takes so long to go through official channels, and it's done. So Sutherland people, rouse yourselves, please. I'll put a contact email in the notes.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll make sure that's in the notes, some kind of way to get in touch and to make that donation if you'd like to. And you were also at Macker Homes recently talking about wood.
Well, it's when people know you're coming up the road. It's amazing how the blooming jungle drums start to rustle, So, I mean, I've always known Neil Sutherland, who's a tremendous proponent of the use of wood in building homes. But his company, Macker, has decided actually to just go ahead and build an affordable, completely net zero, utterly made of wood that came from that Forrest there home. Slightly because, and they did it in 2 weeks flat, because they can make all this sort of cassettes of the wood basically in their beautifully warmly heated workshop. And it's not a difficult thing to do once they piece that all together. The reason they sort of decided to just do it, and it's a lovely house, is because they've spent 18 months waiting for a council, and you might guess which, but it could be any of them, to get through the procurement processes to get even one or two of these homes actually through the paperwork and out the other end. And, they told me stuff about the level of kind of pernickettiness that is pointless pernickettiness as well, which is just standing in the way of rolling out these, which would also be it's local jobs, local wood. It's all the kind of stuff we should, everybody says in their mission statements, that they're for all this kind of stuff. And then when it comes to it, the contracts are only really for volume house builders that are doing, 100 at a time. And they're not doing 100 at a time in a wee village. And apropos of today's news, with rural Scotland kind of on its knees, that's one of the reasons, because nothing is small. It seems sort of insignificant, and small is only one relatively posh second home that'll get onto Grand Designs or something. It's not truly affordable with local materials, which also would cut the cost. And that's what there are plenty people trying to pioneer. So anyway, it was quite an eye-opener, and it was a really, funny day to be kind of walking around seeing all these tiny little details that they've got all the little kind of bit of netting they've got to stop mice getting into the lofts, and it was and shafts that are kind of currently a cupboard. But if you get older and a bit crotchety and have a few bob, you could stick a wee one-person lift to get yourself onto the top floor, and that's still £5 a week heating.
Wow. I mean, just looking at they've got a video on their website of the sort of build, kind of 7 days to crane it in and stick it up. It could quite happily go on Grand Designs. They look absolutely gorgeous. And it does a bit like the Build Canada home stuff. It's local timber, local jobs going into a kind of circular economy. And I dare say nobody else can tick all the procurement boxes in the way that they can in terms of localisation and sustainability. So hopefully once they get over the first hurdles and get that cleared, they're up and away. But, who else is actually doing what they're doing and the way that they're doing it in that local authority area?
Indeed. And
sure,
then
there'd be ways of getting around that from procurement terms. These are the only guys in town, literally.
But the problem is everything. I mean, I don't know how many things, problems people tell me about, and there are a lot, which basically come down to fear of the legal department. So as soon as you've got a what if, people don't seem to feel capable of, yeah, but on the other hand, what if we don't get this thing moving within 18 months? Or actually that probably won't happen, or has anyone actually sued us, or any of the above. I mean, so we just seem to, and I think as well, the size of the council is relevant, because when you're not local and present, it does tend to produce an overprotective, what if we're not there when something happens kind of feeling. In the same way as when you've got bairns and you're not there, you get very sort of, now if this happens, do that. If that happens, do that. And remember to phone me if anything goes wrong. Whereas if you're there, you're just sitting with a cup of tea, letting them run riot, Yes. So it's kind of, there's an awful lot of what's wrong. But on the other hand, there's an awful lot of what's right. I mean, it was joyous to see something just essentially, fuck it, let's just build a blooming house, Yeah. So I think they're having a big swally in it before Christmas, and they're showing folk around it this week. I mean, proper folk, not the likes of me, but folk that might actually help them in their quest to be able to build these blasted houses. And when people actually have asked how affordable is affordable, see, that's really difficult, because if you're only building one, there's a set of costs. If you end up building 10, it's dramatically reduced the cost. So, what they need to be doing is 6 and 10s and things like that, 4, 6s and 10s, and that will make it between 140 and 200,000 pounds per 2-bedroom house, which can easily house 4 adults. And that is still, I have to say, not as cheap as egg, where if you get the land for free, it's 40,000 quid with self-build, which is always worth chucking in, because we're also kind of in our heads thrilled to models that really are persimmon shaped. No offence,
Definitely. I mean, I was just going to say, obviously, there are other groovy Scottish home builders like Heb Homes, for example, but getting the land and getting a serviced plot anywhere you would actually want to be is very, very difficult. I obviously keep looking at these sorts of things. Mrs. Thompson is not keen on self-build. I am not so much nowadays, but I could probably talk you through any episode of Grand Designs from the sort of 90s onwards. Oh yes, that's the such and such, and this happened, and she got pregnant, of course, because they always get pregnant, or something terrible happens, or somebody has a...
They always get pregnant. What kind of patterns that, Fraser?
There's a fantastic... what do you call it? Facebook reel guy who's takes the absolute rip out of the sort of format of the formulaic nature of Grand Designs, but the couples always get pregnant, and you just, the moment Mr. Egypt, who sells antique buttons for a living, and our budget's 2.2 million, makes some sort of horrendous disaster where he decides he can do this bit himself. All of a sudden, the next shot is, and of course, Jacinda fell pregnant, and they need to be in the next 6 weeks.
Jesus, and I think I'm on sign sometimes. Whoa, you definitely get the prize this sort of. But the thing is, I mean, I don't even watch Grand Designs, because the format, the proposition of it is just maddening from the start, because it is absolutely high-end stuff with, just lascivious detail, slavering over kind of the detail, when there are people living in caravans about 100 yards away. So I just can't hack it. It's the same with Traitors, and I realise I'm probably on a wavelength of my own with that
situation. But yes.
Yeah. Anyway, right. We digress.
Yes. These lovely empty glems, of course, would be ideal for wind farms. And with the big SNP announcement this week of a third off energy bills with independents, I have to say a kind of slightly thin announcement, I thought, but dramatic and headline grabbing nonetheless, and a kind of more muscular approach to energy policy from John Swinney.
Yes. Yes, there's a lot in this. I mean, first of all, if you look on the national, they've got the SNP produced a film, which is actually pretty good. It's quite succinct and compares Norway and Scotland. It reminds me of a film somebody made actually in 2019 called The Twin Nations, Scotland and Norway. Oh God, it was me. So it's okay. It's nice to know that it's, one's had no impact whatsoever on anything, but still, it's good that these comparisons are being made because it's absolutely true. Tiny point when you're comparing Scotland to Norway, and you just want to start the story in 1974 when the oil, was found in both basins, Scottish and Norwegian. Obviously, the Norwegians had actually the real energy story for Norway, and I'm so sorry if you're sick of me saying this, but it's always a first time for somebody, was hydro. And they don't use their own oil. So the relevant template was much earlier when local municipalities developed hydropower. It was owned by the municipality, creating a state ownership, but state vis-a-vis the local municipality template for energy. And that helped them to move towards the decision that they would create a state company when oil was discovered and capture the profits into a sovereign wealth fund. They were already on that journey because of what they'd naturally done with hydro. And also, they weren't using oil. So they kept that way. They've kept with largely using hydro. We sadly have had a different template because most of the energy we were using beforehand was coal or other kinds of energy which belonged to the people who owned the land where it was dug up. There was a national coal board. So we had a kind of national framework, and we also had private ownership of a lot of energy resources, and that created the sort of hybrid we came up with oil. Fling in Thatcher and you're got a fucking turbocharged kind of, intention to get private business in there, making millions, billions out of it. And for sure, that's where we have been. He's absolutely also right that we're watching this thing happen all over again with renewables. And I think he is right that bills would be, a third. Some people are sort of saying a gas. Well, where's the maths on that? Where's the workings? And it is a bit hard to see exactly where that comes from. There's a various bits. There's a paper that they've put out. They've looked at analysis produced by Ofgem, which I think sounds a little bit like the locational pricing argument, which would be to say that if you took some of the problems out that basically don't pertain to Scotland. So, for example, the reliance particularly on gas, which happens south of the border, because they didn't expand wind energy when we did, because they didn't like the look of it. We would be not, if we took gas out of the equation, which sets the price for everything across the whole UK currently, we would be, most of the time, not waking gas up during a day, in which case prices would really come down quite a lot. There's various other things he's talking about: increasing storage capacity, put more pump hydro in, which means you can basically use that as base load, because people worry sometimes. We've got a lot of wind, but it's intermittent. So if you do that, pump hydro, you stick the water back up, leave it sitting there. When you need it, bang, the flick of a switch. Same as gas, flick of a switch, and you get energy that's base load to back up all the wind. There's also, though he doesn't go into it explicitly, the folly of generators being paid not to produce electricity. That's the constraint payment, presumably, that's being paid almost 40% of the time at the moment to wind farms not to produce because there isn't enough grid capacity to get the energy to market. And that is slightly overlooking the bit that is driving people bonkers all over rural Scotland, because what's happening at the moment, strikes me, is that we're producing a lot of electricity and more green energy to go into a whole stack of pylons, to go into a subsea connector, to go to England, bluntly. And our way of dealing with a UK market is not to have a series of smart local grids to cut the amount of money you need to put into these huge interconnectors. We do big old energy shifts as if we were still back in the good old days of, everything, coal, the original grid. And this time, instead of it being fossil fuel created energy that gets flung up the lines. We're whipping green energy around instead of rethinking completely how you might do this and how you might keep energy local. So that, I would have said, is one of the other things which would counteract the accusation that you telling me is now flying around, which is making my brains boil even at the suggestion, that we should be grateful in Scotland that it's still a UK, because we wouldn't have the money to put up the hardware for the green revolution on our own. Is that the size of it?
That's pretty much it. Yes, I think that's the essentially these islands proposition is that it's
our islands, isn't it?
Oh, some kind of islands.
Yeah, well, whoever they are.
Together, Mark II.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, actually, first of all, well, it would be quite nice for us not to have to pay into the UK's nuclear levy for, forms of energy we have no intention of using. But that's another cost that you could remove. But the point is, the Norwegians, when they became independent, were the second poorest country in Europe in 1905. I think the poorest was Portugal. And they still paid themselves for their entire hydro structure and an awful lot of their oil exploration. The Icelanders, who nearly went bust in 2008, thanks to their own, daft kind of predatory BAM pots, and helped along by Gordon Brown putting them on the terrorism register, the Icelanders have completely financed their own geothermal energy production. All of it, the drills, the power stations, the pipelines, the gubbins in the houses, all of it came. Iceland has 350,000 people. So the point is, this is utterly ridiculous nonsense, because, we would, if we weren't, then you've got to say, oh, but look at the cost of the pylons, look at the cost of the subsea connectors. Yeah, that's true. And if we were going to horse and sell our energy, we certainly would need connectors. It might be that the Scottish government is thinking, let's let these guys put all the, the gubbins in, and then basically, yeah, when we're independent, we'll sort of seize this and turn the whole game around. The trouble is, right now, having, just been up at Beaulieu last weekend, they're still beeling there about absolutely everything. And they're watching a Scottish government basically rubber stamp every wind farm proposal that even Highland Council is opposing. So it's becoming like, what's the point in any local government? Because the Scottish government will say the Electricity Act means we need to okay it. Now, strangely, the same Electricity Act is not being used when it comes to nuclear. Because suddenly, for some reason, the Scottish government grows a bit of a backbone and says, hey, we'll use our planning control here to never authorise a nuclear power plant. So how come it's kind of got nexus or got skin in the game and power to do something when it comes to saying no nuclear, but when it comes to saying we actually will start to really ration or give local control to people about the siting of wind farms, which, just to keep repeating it, are not the first, second or third in most glens, they're the fourth, fifth, sixth and more. I think the Scottish government in lots of rural Scotland is still being mightily blamed. And I know that because I'm off this weekend. I mean, God, will I never stop moving around with this thing, to Tainault on the way to Oban, where they want to show the film and have another debate. There's a big event going on down in Jedburgh in the Borders about the same thing. So for anybody who's really wired up about this, and it's quite a lot of people, this announcement, I think, will be actually quite annoying because it seems to brush over the lack of protection the Scottish government is offering currently to communities who feel they're being taken a loan of. Okay, by the UK government, but hey, where's the guys in shining armour now?
Well, I was kind of expecting this speech to actually kind of knit some of that together, actually, which it didn't do, and kind of take both rural and urban Scotland along with him in a way that speech kind of had the opportunity to do. Actually, we have now, we're at 100% of renewables, and what we need to do is actually have it sort of dotted about a bit more effectively and, diversify how it's used, district heating, etc. He certainly, as you say, went into the kind of increase in pumped storage so that you've got that kind of big battery there that you can charge up and switch on as and when it's needed. but it didn't seem to knit together the kind of current pertinent strands of discontent into a kind of unified campaign for the election. But it's certainly much more bold than we've seen of late, and much more sort of determinate in terms of the independence side of the campaign. But you mentioned nuclear. There's a cross-party consensus on new nuclear. Did you not know that?
Yes, actually, I wrote a column about this because I didn't really mean to, but I ended up accidentally. I was meaning to listen to the Prime Minister's questions and just clicked by accident on the Scottish questions exchange that actually happened the week before. And my God, it was annoying. I mean, I know it's always been annoying. Did Joanna used to go into this?
Yes, but it was a kind of three. I think basically everybody had to go for Scottish questions. I suppose when there were more, quotes Scottish MPs, they're the same number, of course, than there ever were, albeit slightly reduced at the last election. You actually got questions from Scots about Scotland and about from Plaid Cymru and what have you. It's the randomness of Labour having to ask questions back in the day when they didn't. They had one Labour MP in Scotland. They obviously get now significantly more, but they still managed to get Surrey Hills and various other.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Well, so anyway, the point of it was there's the level of orchestration between the Tories and Labour about trying to whack the SNP over being anti-nuclear Luddites was, I mean, as I said in the article, positively symphonic. I mean, they're even using the same language across the benches, as they say, which I would have thought is just one to watch, really, because it sort of gives the game away a wee bit. But certainly all the opening questions, and I'm not going to do the accents, you can just supply it. But, everybody seemed to be from the deepest, darkest bits of the home counties that you could possibly come up with. And, lamenting, well, Dougie Alexander started off with sort of lamenting the SNP's dogmatic opposition to nuclear power. And then a few minutes later, there was a Tory from Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, obviously so close to the border, who moaned that a key plank of the SNP's dogmatic arguments against new nuclear is cost. So we've got dogmatic well in there. Then we got the Luddite bit. Andrew Bowie, who's a Scottish Tory MP for Kincardine somewhere, Shadow Energy spokesman, was bemoaning the SNP's Luddite mentality. And later, another Tory was talking about Luddites and ideological blinkers stopping Dounreay and Torness getting new nuclear projects. And so Dougie sort of welcomed the genuine cross-party consensus. Now, okay, I know there's a sort of makey-uppy world where, you currently are there, and kind of clearly the polls would suggest that you might as well enjoy it while you can, basically, Labour and the Tories, because you are going to get pretty much whopped at the next anything elections, albeit you've got a bit of a longer lifetime in the Commons. But, I mean, come on. This is a consensus between yourselves, Labour and the Tories. And until either of you wins the Holyrood elections big style, gents, that's not genuine cross-party consensus. And then you've got to you've got to keep reminding people about just why, everybody is, so many experts feel that the problems of nuclear are just sort of mind-blowing. There was a very good article by Dr. Paul Dorfman who was pointing out, just to get this perspective right, because you get the feeling from these guys that everyone's going nuclear, so why don't we, why not just join the crowd? As Paul Dorfman points out, 92% of all new power capacity added across the world in 2024 was renewables, with new nuclear virtually nowhere. All new nuclear builds are vastly over cost and over time. Pretty much the large reactors are the same offered 25 years ago, no new designs. And important point here, because all sorts of people who probably didn't know much about it were jumping up and down about the small modular reactors that could be the game changers. And according to him, these are still in the design stage and create many problems with chemical and physically reactive waste. In fact, they produce relatively more than large reactors. So yeah, let's go with that. So it's just, you've got to kind of keep saying, what is this thing about trying to force nuclear onto Scotland? I mean, what is that about?
Yeah, well, where's the desire? What's it to you? I think would be the answer.
Well, I think that they're feeling that basically there's what's in it are large companies, because the other point I was trying to make is if Sizewell and Hinckley and all the rest of it are such incredible propositions, and we've already gone through how they've gone through their estimates just at an unbelievable rate that would dwarf any kind of arguments about over budget ferries. But anyway. The EDF and the Chinese had to be bought out of one of those nuclear reactors, but there's no money from the City of London. And if it was such a great, gift, and actually it secured a higher strike price for each unit of energy from Ed Davey back in the day than any other form of energy here. So you're going to get, good money forever pretty much from nuclear, and not a single penny from Britain went into that. So it looks to me like this big companies lobbying. There's clearly old plants in Scotland that are, at the stage where they will have to be replaced with something. So we need, for us, a different mix of energy coming soon. And the British government are looking at it, and they've obviously got a lot of folk lobbying saying we could just put another wee extra onto Torness or another extra onto Dounreay. And it might well be true that people locally are looking at the end of jobs and thinking, well, actually, we'd rather have something than nothing. But, if you stand back for a bit, it's absolutely true that we would end up creating a mix, if we were independent, that suits Scotland, that we have just an utter embarrassment of, energy riches, that we would strip out a lot of extra costs that arise from south of England being needy in all forms of energy, particularly in green, and having an obsession with nuclear energy we don't need to have.
Amen. And it didn't strike me as a particularly hot political line to push, although certainly in East Lothian, being pretty close to Torness, we get pounded by an ass popping up on YouTube continuously, and the sort of nuclear stuff is one of the main themes. So they must be testing it to some degree, and it must be going down reasonably well. But I don't see that happening across the whole of Scotland. And these projects, as you say, are just seem to be kind of money pits, and it's most likely a kind of, well, we've already got a big plug point here. There's the distribution infrastructure lives in these sort of 4 or 5 different points, and what we want to do is just swap over the generating capacity rather than having to look at moving things around.
But it would be a fabulous thing, and pigs will fly, and it'll never happen. And obviously nobody from the Scottish government is obviously ever listening to any of this. But it would be a great thing to just decide to have a Scottish Energy Summit and just begin to have a discussion about what now that we've crossed the Rubicon and sort of started to think about how energy would be in a post-independent Scotland. It wouldn't be a walk in the park, as anybody who looks at this knows, because the assets are privately owned. They just are. But yet regulation, taxation, transmission, all those things would return to a Scottish government, and you could be making different amounts of money and having very different policies, perhaps moving to some sort of different future, and absolutely backing those. You would finally be able to have a Scottish energy company without Westminster smacking you out of the head with devolved regulations. You could do all of that stuff, but you could do that blinking debate now, except nobody will, because, if any MSPs are wondering about to get any of the kind of snash that I hear when I'm wandering around about the current situation with wind farms, I see that he's saying, there could be a requirement to give communities a real stake and a share in the profits. I think they're quoting 20%. Well, okay, that would definitely be better than nothing. But really, having been, I am myself a pretty big green evangelist and like wind energy. Listening to people, it's that they want control over what's happening. So they can actually, there was a point in one of the meetings where one of the local SNP MSPs talked about this idea of a share in the profits, and she was howled down by representatives from a third of the community councils in the Highlands, because that's fine, but a share in the profits still means it's the Wild West. it still means these guys can come and put 7, 8, 10 wind farms in your glen, but you will actually get a kind of, you'll get some money for it. And the guys who got the money the first time round are very happy with the money, but they want control now. So that if there's 5 wind farms proposed, those 2 are okay. That one definitely isn't. We could talk about the other 2. That's what will never happen in a centralised country like ours.
And it's not as if it's going to, actually what we really want is just 2 turbines so that we can power the entire villages of district heating system and then leave it. Thank you very much. And that's everybody covered. And maybe 1 to sell stuff into the grid.
Yes, or have that option. Yeah. Whereas if, once again, this is another top-down only game in town, is that you now get absolutely an enforced payment. Well, that's fine, but which you could perhaps use to offset bills locally. That could all happen, but it still just isn't answering what's really angering people. Anyway, said it all.
Talking of better together, as you said in the revived Better Together in the cross-party consensus on nuclear, Malcolm Offord, he of Vote No Borders, is aff to reform UK.
Yeah.
So lots of greeting Tories, because I think he is actually still the current treasurer of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. I think you might have, if you're a slightly more decent fellow, you might have resigned that, left it a bit, and then joined Reform. But just to go from currently in post to not even in your party any longer would be a bit of a kick in the teeth.
It would indeed. Somebody needs to update his LinkedIn stuff, actually, because he's still Shadow Ministry for Energy Security and Net Zero. But there you go. And I suppose anybody who was really terribly troubled by, all sorts of ethics and stuff wouldn't have been angling for getting into the House of Lords by making a huge cash donation to cash or not, donation to the Conservative Party. So it's a bit sort of, I've been on various programmes with him, and he's quite a sort of machine operator. He will just sit and kind of, churn out the line with varying degrees of kind of verve, Yeah. But, they're obviously cock a hoop, because this is like, although I noticed last night, Scotland Tonight had a discussion of it, and the Labour lass on it, Kat Headley, said she'd never heard of Offord, Baron Offord of Garville, as we should rightly call him. I think you haven't...
Take that with a pinch of salt, but anyway.
Yeah, I think we have heard of him, So, yeah, I'm sure there'll be traipsing him around. Whether this offsets the problems of the racism allegations and stuff, because I'm sure the average person doesn't really, know who Mr. Offord is. It's just the fact they've got a Lord Offord now. So if you're trying to kind of just add a generalised feeling of respectability about something, a guy with dark glasses, a decent suit and a lordship is probably better than a punch in the throat, eh?
Well, I think it's also more about a signal to other Conservative Party members. That's really what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Is the kind of big sort of flashing beacon that says, how it looked like that was sinking? Well, it definitely is sinking, and everybody else is off. And, here's a kind of acceptable face of conservatism for other Tories to go, actually, I think we'll just go to Reform as well. And it's more about a kind of floodgate thing rather than anything particularly to do with him. And of course, as I say, he was the original AstroTurf founder of Vote No Borders that we mentioned a few weeks back when we were talking about the BBC bias reports. So, a major player in the independence campaign and not necessarily playing with a straight bat.
And actually, I see, interestingly, he does want to stand for the Scottish Parliament. So he says that it's sadly not possible to renounce a life peerage. Damn.
But if only there was a way.
He's like, no. Well, I'm sure if you can get shot in, Andrew, you must be able to get shot anybody, really, yes. But anyway. But peers can resign their membership of the House of Lords. So it looks like he's resigning his membership, and that allows him to stand for the Scottish Parliament. So, that, and I guess the other thing is it puts more hats in the ring for the leadership of Scottish Reform. They've already got Graham Simpson, who was a Conservative MSP who defected. There's somebody else, can't remember. But, there's a couple of them in there now, so they can have a kind of unholy sort of bidding war before the off.
I think Malcolm is certainly going to be topping Graham in the popularity leagues, I would imagine, and it would be most unsurprising if we didn't see him fronting the campaign. So that will be giving it large with old school Toryism. So it'll be interesting to see that in the lead up to the 2026 election. Talking of the transfer window, get me, bring back Pat Joyce.
Yes. You're not fooling anybody.
Scottish Greens are continuing to pick up members and also councillors. They've got 2 new councillors, previous people who had defected from respectively the SNP and Labour. One in the SNP councillor in Murray and Labour councillor in Edinburgh are now sitting as Green-aligned councillors, and that was much vaunted recently. So the Green Party continuing to pick up people there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, grand.
So all good to there. And yes, it's been quite the week though of various machinations. Dear old Keir was in Scotland, telling us that not only had asked for these budget matters, but his fingerprints were all over the budget. I think if I was an Ask Star Wars media advisor, I'd be like, oh God, why do they do this to us every sodding time?
But then I saw there was another, I can't remember the detail about it. Rachel Reeves had shocked everyone. It was a very amusingly written piece in the National by saying that she was going to take questions from have a press conference with everybody in it. So, rush of blood to the head. And then there was a correction sent out saying, no, I meant journalist, singular. Basically, there's only one journalist that was going to be in this session. So it is just, there's nobody comes north of the border and basically does any favours for their party at all. But I know
were actually integral to one of the most unpopular budgets.
Oh yes, absolutely. I know we were sort of talking about whether or not to talk about Ukraine. And I thought, what can we really say about this? Because it's so enormous and dreadful and whatever. But it's sort of, I was listening to various things, and actually the enormity of this is just because there was a great interview actually on the whatever you call Good Morning Scotland now, with a Professor Paul, didn't catch the surname properly, who was really talking about where we're moving here, is that basically America regards Russia as its ally, and Europe is now just being left completely to sort of go hang. And this is a completely new world order that basically the Americans have been trying to say, Trump particularly from Trump 1, trying to say for a long time, this idea that we're actually, in all intents and purposes, they might as well just withdraw from NATO. So, they're not going to supply any kind of security to Ukraine for the dreadful deal they're proposing, which would at least stop Russia from having another go when everyone's not looking. And another kind of analyst looking at all of this with really, really gloomily was saying that basically Zelensky is now in an appalling situation because he can't accept the American deal. They actually went as far as saying he will be assassinated. And there will be civil war in Ukraine because they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And, it's a horrible thing to think of, the daily horror you're having to deal with. But for this guy, the imminence of a really horrible end, which looks for many people like it's coming. The only point of any kind of bright news has been, we talked about this a long time, I think it might have been actually even when Pat was around, that there are these frozen Russian assets held within Europe. And the idea is to just nab them basically and use them as either a grant or a loan to Ukraine to let them get more weapons. And there's been a kind of, everybody's beginning to be moving towards that. I mean, geez, so slowly. Again, you'd be pulling your hair out if you were in Ukraine with all the glad words. And the sticking people point has been Belgium. And this seems to be because Belgium is the main, where the assets are mostly held. It's a Brussels-based financial depository. and the Belgian ministers are really fearful of Russian retaliation, which could bankrupt their country if all of Europe decided, right, let's just take the money and run. But this is partly, when you talk about Starmer, what he's been up to is hosting all these talks. And apparently, behind the scenes and all the rest of it, Britain is hopeful a deal on the assets can be done within days. So that it's not going to, and with one bound, they are free. But if that did happen, it would certainly start to give some prospect of levelling things up. But still, it's the kind of, many journalists just writing that all these European leaders, including our own, are basically, fiddling while Rome burns, because there needs to be a massive, very sort of muscular new position that doesn't involve trying to curry up to Trump, because in that process, you win a few kind of little trinkets, but you lose your agency. In fact, it's been lost a very long time. And that's something that Europe's going to have to get its act together with fast, with us, of course, hardly part of that equation at all, thanks to Brexit.
Totally. And, of course, this big strategic paper that they put out basically saying that, Europe was toast and it was only going to be around for a generation before it was completely lost. The Trump administration are pretty much telling you all you need to know, I think. It's just an appalling situation in Ukraine. And if you look at the maps and the amount of land that's been captured, and then the peace deal requiring them to give up even more rather than just kind of freezing at the points where they are at present, and downsizing your army so that you can be weakened for, as you say, any sort of part two escalation, must just be such an invidious position to be in. And it's not going to be it's never going to be a long-term resolved matter if that's the way the peace goes down. And they do seem to have a sort of gun to Zelensky's head at the minute in terms of these decisions. Yeah.
Also, just while we're at it, it's kind of, we hear that Tony Blair's been dropped from Donald Trump's Board of Peace in Gaza. Well, surprise, surprise, due to objections by Arab states that didn't like his invading Iraq stuff. But it does make politicos here make the point that, as 2026 starts, both of the Trump-led peace plans for big conflicts that have dominated the last decade haven't got anywhere near solution. And behind the ceasefire, supposed ceasefire that Israel has negotiated, there is just constant death. And it's being used to sort of have a bit of a news screen over big stories. Palestine Action activists are on hunger strike, in jail. There's still so many things happening, but I suspect also the TV companies particularly who had, based an awful lot of their presentation, I'm thinking of Channel 4 particularly, in Israel, Gaza for some time, they've just run out of budget. All of them, I would imagine, will have run out of money because all their news has been foreign news now for God knows how long. So that really these situations are just being overlooked. It's all drifting. Trump can say what he likes. He can even say that, that Zelensky's people are really happy with his plan. They completely aren't. They just aren't. And our own leaders still are hardly confident enough to sort of just call a spade and tell it like it is. So it's a really shelpit kind of, poor end to the year.
Definitely. And the Eurovision Song Contest.
Well, it's basically going to. I don't know how it's going to go ahead because as somebody again, if Pat was your sports correspondent, I'm your sort of Eurovision correspondent here.
But there's a huge list of countries that have already pulled out with a whole. So Netherlands, Ireland, Slovenia, all
Spain. Importantly, it's one of the big five funders. So Spain's the one that really, really hurts. There's two, Belgium again and Iceland, because I was staying with an Icelandic pal when I was away up in Sutherland, And we were all going, why the hell's Iceland not there? Because these guys are so pro-Palestine right on and very integral for a small nation to Eurovision. But they're taking the decision this week. So those guys could, I would think, given who's already out, those guys will be out. The argument seems to be that when there was basically, I'm trying to remember now the argument, because to me this is just absolutely no-brainer. No, it's not that. It's the reasons that the Eurovision committee have allowed Israel is because the Israeli broadcaster hasn't broken the rules. The broadcaster hasn't been relaying political messages, supposedly. Right, there you go. Whereas the Russians got kicked out immediately because the broadcaster did bend the rules and apparently started broadcasting anti-Ukrainian, pro-Russian stuff. Now, I mean, honestly, we could sit here for however long you want. The lyrics, the very presence, I mean, and just standing back from all of this, come on, this is the end of Eurovision, and it's sad in a way for those who quite like to sort of jolly, wacky, sort of rainbowy kind of night of nonsense with bad accents and just stupid fun, basically. I can't see this isn't going to happen because the kind of people who are like Eurovision tend to like life, tend to like Palestine, tend to not like being manipulated. Have now had 2 Eurovisions where everything was manipulated about the Israeli offer, including the sound clearly being changed on the night. So that's it, gone. And I mean, I think I'll certainly not be watching it if it does limp on. And I suspect, the large bulk of people are now, that's it, over.
I quite agree. And these are the type of things that you don't actually come back from. You get, it's a bit like the sort of declining participation in organised religion following COVID. Once you get out of the habit of it, I think this could be a bit of a breaking point for the whole outfit, really. And dancing on the head of a pin on the sort of technicalities is not really going to cut it, frankly.
No, because clearly the broadcasters represent the whole tilt of the thing is it's countries that are being represented. So whilst the detail of their membership might be all about individual broadcasters, and there was even an argument last year that it was sort of because the relevant broadcaster whose name I've forgotten was sort of left adrift in a kind of pretty unpleasant environment within Israel, there was a kind of slight hands across the water to still connect with these guys, to keep them on the sides of the angels sort of line going on. But this is just, no, this is way past it all now. So I don't know what these guys are thinking about, because it may have just made tail end news, because all the kind of people who are in charge of news programs are serious-minded dudes who won't admit to having fluffy pants, never mind watching Eurovision. And yet it will, once as this thing rolls round, it will be a big, big moment of condemnation for Israel.
Yeah, I mean, talking about big news stories, so I mean, the Palestine Action hunger strikes are a hugely important bit of news that hardly seems to be getting any coverage at all. And the hunger strikers are really entering a sort of dangerous phase in their campaign. But, we've hardly heard a peep about it.
No, and I mean, I think I was going to mention that a wee while ago and it sort of slipped through, because there's just not a lot getting out information-wise. It was the same when people were arrested. They got arrested and they sort of disappeared for a while. Then they went off the news agenda, and without the supplement of something that grabs attention, they've just quietly gone into jail and sort of disappeared. But every time there is something that this is what, there we just go, because all that sort of emphasis on Eurovision puts a spotlight back on the behaviour of Israel, and then gives a kind of a connection that brings the protests that are going on here back into people's minds. So it certainly isn't going to go away.
No. Looking back to the UK stuff, and obviously talked about Starmer being in Scotland and bringing all these European leaders together in regards to the Ukrainian issue. It's not making him any more popular, and he continues to be very unpopular, as John Swinney pointed out in his most recent speech, to the point where the right-wing Labour outfit, Labour Together, are actually canvassing for his replacement.
Yes, that was quite amusing actually, because I think they've Labour Together have tried to say this was just re-canvassing some earlier question asked long before Starmer was elected to create a baseline so that you could make useful comparisons. That will be right. But actually, I mean, there was a very interesting piece written by Peter Kellner about how Labour could win without Keir Starmer. And, there's folk that sort of, actually it's Fraser Nelson, who is ex of this parish and a bit to the right, you would say, Fraser, wouldn't you? Who wrote but wrote for the Times, and was basically saying that things start to fall apart when there's leaders, and there's any kind of change of leadership. It basically goes very wrong. And he was citing James Callaghan, Theresa May, Rishi Sunak, Theresa trying to get a personal mandate because she wasn't elected, Sunak trying to put the party out of its agony, James Callaghan back in the day because he couldn't control Parliament, and so Fraser's kind of surmise was, you just got to stick with Keir because it could all go, terribly wrong. And of course, Peter Kellner, who is, a wee tad older than Fraser. And actually, sometimes I think age has got a lot to do with it, because you do just remember things that just seem to have disappeared from the argument elsewhere. But anyway, he's remembering that, Harold Macmillan succeeded Anthony Eden. There was a terrible situation for Anthony Eden, who resigned when his doctors warned he wouldn't survive if he stayed in office. And there was an example, a Fraser Nelson one, of you'd make a change, it doesn't look like it's working. And it was rocky at the beginning, but Macmillan, the Super Mac, even some people will remember, and he was the one who coined that most of our people have never had it so good. That was the guy that came up with that. And he was the guy that actually delivered council houses, funnily enough, even though it was actually, usually Labour councils that did the building. The policy came actually from Super Mac. So that was quite a useful change. Anyway, he goes through quite a lot of, especially actually Thatcher, and then getting rid of Thatcher and putting John Major in. And, apparently within weeks of succeeding Thatcher, I didn't quite remember this, John Major's satisfaction score was a plus 61%. And, before it with Thatcher, it had been 45%. And of course, John Major, won another election victory. There's a little megaphone on a stand and everything. Although it all went pear-shaped after that. But anyway, there's loads of examples here. And it seems to be that actually the lesson is, if you're going to have a new Labour leader, you have to be a change new leader, not a guardian of continuity. His point, and it's a very interesting article, is that the people who've managed to have a successful transition, and he actually throws dear freaking Boris into it, the mission was to clear up the Brexit mess. Okay, he made a big mess of everything, but still, that was his mission, and that got him through. And he's saying the difficulty for Labour is that it looks like any of the people who might be kind of excellent to take over don't have the ambition of having a big change, a transformational new direction here, which could, for example, just be dealing with the long outwash of Thatcher crippling the economy, basically, through Brexit, through everything else. There needs to be that, not a guardian of continuity, but it looks like anybody who's coming forward in the Labour hot list created by the guys is just another continuity candidate.
Which makes sense, because that's the kind of right-wing think tank that they are. That's what they're looking to continue. The country seems to think it's voted in for a left-wing Labour government, but the government itself doesn't agree, and neither do any of its backers.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing? Because nobody ever talks about freaking prisons. I know everyone goes, oh God, prisons. But the thing is, we've got, back in the news again today, there's another early release. There's another lot of scratching the head about remand, for example, because a quarter of the prison population are folk that are put there on remand. And there was again, I would say a good interview with the lass who is producing a report today about remand prisoners, Sarah Snell, on Good Morning Scotland. I'm sorry, I'm never going to get round to it.
Radio Scotland breakfast for all of those interested, and it definitely was these islands, because our islands would be a bit too colonial for them.
Okay, so anyway, back to the you're still determined to avoid it, prison subject, but this is obviously, since I was involved with this in 2008.
So these are our prisons we're on about?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, this is Scottish prisons are kind of, there's an early release happening again today. All the evidence is that there's a bit of a quick turnaround and people are very often in. But just on this thing about remand, it's 25%. These are people who are actually, currently innocent.
Yeah.
They're only meant to be in there for around 110 days is meant to be the maximum. The average stay is 6 months to 2 years. That is, you haven't actually gone to court yet. And what that's doing is, so if you had a job, you're not going to have one when you come out. If you had a home, you're not going to have one. Yep. You're not going to have anything when you come out. Your life's going to be completely upside down. And when people are kind of like not very sympathetic to any of the folk, no smoke without fire and all that kind of thing. I mean, the other big problem, the biggest problem in all of this, is that people are being sentenced to remand instead of just knees in the breeze and you're out the door because they have chaotic lives. And because there's a reasonable expectation that if they're let go, despite the fact that they haven't produced much in the way of difficulty, they will probably not turn up when they're meant to because they're on drugs, their lives are chaotic, they're moving from place to place. And it's the chaos that underlines all of this. This is exactly what we found all that time ago in 2007 with the Prisons Commission. It's the chaos that some people live in, which means that what they start off with is they're just, I appreciate for a lot of people, I mean, I've had the stone through the window and the stuff, the wood pile stolen, they're no biggies, but small things really, really rile people. And folk in working class areas are getting far, far more than the average bear, actually. And their patience and tolerance of it is worn so thin, they just want people put away, even if it's just for 6 weeks. 6 months, it's respite. So I get all that. And there needs to be those, solutions close to hand. And yet we're just going around in circles on this. And no one will say the one word that really has to be raised in all of this, sheriffs. Because you can say everything you want about all the reasons that we've got longer sentences and this historic kind of cases are being rolled up with current offences now because DNA evidence has got stronger. All of these things, okay, for sure. But the problem we had back then, I suspect still now, is that the sheriffs who are sentencing are simply not convinced that community payback works. And not being across the money put into it, I don't know if it does or it doesn't, but all the evidence is that it has a better chance of turning people around than any prison sentence. So, I don't know when we're going to have an honest conversation about this, but it looks like we've managed to get through another day of it being in the news without that key question being asked, because nobody wants to have a fight with the sheriffs.
Yeah, and I think also there's been a bit of a retreat in the kind of confidence level, shall we say, in the SNP government in these sorts of matters. Obviously, you've got Community Justice Scotland, which is a new national organisation. There was a big move from 2007 with the kind of whole system approach to youth justice and various other initiatives, which obviously brought crime right down to an all-time low. But that type of disruptive and highly upsetting behaviour, and when previous employment, we had I know you've told us
chaotic
that one. Bam up the stairs, and the only thing that did stop him was putting him in remand. But that was by no means a solution, and it wasn't what we wanted. And it didn't help him in any way.
It didn't sort the problem.
No, not in the slightest.
It gave you respite, and this is the thing.
But it's a hell of an expensive bit of respite.
All we're doing in so many respects with stuff is just absolutely plugging gaps in the sure knowledge that the system itself won't work. Yep. We don't seem to have the wherewithal or concentration or whatever it is to sort of shift wholesale to a different situation. And I would absolutely say that grinding poverty and utter despair play their part in all of this, not reaching any kind of good solution. I'm saying all of this looking today, waiting for a village that's about to be flooded basically at any point today. And as I go about, seeing all the same points that we've tried to point out to the council for the last 5 years, get gummed up, flooded. I'll be out in my wellies again trying to unplug this stuff. And it just gars you greet. Because, we've got the capacity to create systems that work, and we can't actually seem to just pull our heads out of this enough to get long-term shifts on it all. Right.
Well, there we go. But yes, I agree certainly. And what I was coming on to say was that the SNP government used to be much more bullish on these justice reforms and presenting them to the public. Are kind of getting knocked continuously by Conservatives, particularly given it the SNP's soft touch on justice. But do you want a long-term solution or a short-term fix of feeling that somebody who's committed a minor crime is really, really paid? So it's a much more complicated issue.
But if you are where we are. If you are where we are now, right, which is, when all this started back in 2007, for sure, Kenny McCaskill was pretty bullish on all of this stuff. That's why this all got front of house. But also because Alex Salmond gave him his head and said, you just do what you want, Kenny, and that was what he wanted. So, okay, there was a pretty robust approach. But we were not at the stage where we actually had the flowing prisons, which meant that you actually had to have sudden releases like this. Now we've reached a different level of problem. I don't know where the public's at with this then. I just think most people can't be arsed. And it's just an area they don't even have to think about, particularly don't want to spend money on. And yet this will just keep recurring. And I suppose people have now had to accept that there is people being released today who shouldn't be out. You only get out if you're, less than 4 years, no sexual offenders, no domestic violence, no murderers. So, but still, which way does that put the public? Are they just absolute bailing, or have they got to a stage of thinking, well, we're getting now that, unless we're going to actually start building new prisons, which pretty much all the academics say it's like building new motorways, feels good for a while, then gets clogged up. You don't switch people onto public transport by building a new motorway. So anyway, so it goes on.
But the reason the jails weren't overflowing under Kenny McCaskill's tenure is because they did more to actually stop people going to prison in the first place. And I think there was much more front foot on that, diversion from prosecution and what have you, which does seem to have kind of slightly waned, certainly in public consciousness, if not in reality. So yeah, we'll be more on that, I'm sure, in the coming times. And we are coming up to the hour there, but I don't think we could end without having looked at the Sandy Peggy Employment Tribunal, which has just had its judgment handed down, although not the remedy. A bit of a mixed bag, a sort of complicated mixed judgment on these different aspects of the claims that Miss Peggy had made against her employer, NHS Fife.
It is actually, I can hardly even get to sum this all out. And if you look at different people, although obviously some of the folk on Sandy Peggy's side are saying this vindicates her because it was found that NHS Fife had harassed her. And then if you drill down to what it was actually harassment about, it's kind of, you could argue it's fairly minor, though I'm sure having an employer in your face is never a good one. On the other hand, the judge, the employment tribunal, dismissed Sandy Peggy's claims against Dr. Beth Upton. This is the transgender colleague that she had the problem with in the changing room. And the tribunal unanimously dismissed all of Peggy's allegations against Beth Upton and all the allegations against the health board, apart from these specific points about the harassment complaint. So clearly Sandy Peggy has got other court actions pending and very possibly will appeal this one. But it does look like it doesn't make NHS Fife come out of it covered in glory. But it still doesn't leave any kind of solution, as far as I can see, as to quite what is actually going to happen right now. And it's all these different kind of blending of people's rights that an employer has to go through. And despite the recent verdicts on the Equality Act and the victory for women group, it's still going to be the case that I think a lot of employers are basically walking on eggshells trying to figure this out. So I doubtless will be back on the Sandy Peggy trail when more of the cases have emerged.
Yes, I think it is almost certainly likely to be appealed because of all of the different aspects of the judgment and some of the statements have been made by Sex Matters, the sex rights charity, and kind of initial statements by Sandy Peggy's legal team, the judgment seemed to make a distinction between public services, which were found could only be single sex under the Equality Act, and services provided by an employer, and seemed to put the kind of onus on women to object, which gives employers a real minefield to walk through, as you say, balancing different people's rights. The matters that were upheld were really the complaint that she was victimised as a result of raising these objections and kind of treated, akin to sort of a bigot or a racist simply for objecting to sharing a changing room with a male-bodied person, even though that person was transgender and held a kind of strongly convicted transgender identity. But it doesn't seem to make the matter any more clear. This judgment itself is not binding, so it doesn't become sort of case law that impacts other employment tribunals or other aspects of law, and would only do so if it was appealed and a more superior court look at it and pass down a judgment. But I don't think this will be the last that we've heard on it, but it kind of again brings to the fore the complexity of these issues, and allowing self-identification of sex, and a mix between what many people would consider to be single-sex provision in single-sex spaces to become de facto mixed sex unless somebody objects. So we're kind of no clearer in terms of the way that other employers might seek to navigate this position, and it doesn't, as I say, seem to have an impact on public services and public provision of changing rooms or single-sex provision. So,
although, just by the by, I noticed that I was at the Guides and the WI. There used to be the WRI, but I think they're the Women's Institute now. Also put out statements saying they wouldn't have trans women as part of their membership. But I think the WI have set up a parallel organisation which trans women can join, which then, as an affiliate, allows them to be there. And it seems to be largely driven by insurance or legal stuff again.
Well, again,
I'm sure we'll get corrected.
You can't have a single-sex organisation or association which is not single-sex. So the Girl Guides and the Women's Institute, under the For Women Scotland judgment and the Equality Act, sex was held to be biological, and therefore if you're operating a single-sex association, whether that's a running club or a Ramblers Association or the Women's Institute, that provision cannot be single-sex if it is also mixed-sex. So they've had to make these announcements in the last week.
But as I say, I think they have found a way to have an affiliate organisation. Anyway, I don't know enough about this.
Yeah, the Women's Institute were certainly saying that they will have kind of other types of meetings which will be mixed sex.
Right, there we are. We're well over the hour now, Fraser.
We certainly are. We will be back next week, although we are loping forward to Christmas, it has to be said. I'm very much in full flow of Tiny Thompson Christmas with blinking elves abounding, having to do creative things every morning. I had a dance recital to go to this week.
What, you dancing?
Not me, thankfully. No, I was just watching this dance recital, and they were all very good, but it was an hour long, and I checked my phone during a kind of brief interregnum. At one point, I thought, God, it must be coming up to the finale now, and it's only been 26 minutes. So there was me thinking I thought it must be about 55 minutes in, but no.
I went to a similar one for my stepdaughters, and I am probably quite tall, and even quite tall sitting, and so I actually nodded off, and apparently was visible to all the bairns, because even sitting at the back, I was at least a foot taller than everyone else. But anyway, I'm sure it's all grist to the mill, and it'll be jolly enough when it comes.
Absolutely. Right, and on that note, we will see you next week, chums.